We're chit-chatting white blood cells today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So, so this, obviously when we look at any of our numbers, we always look for functional ranges, and these are the functional ranges um, that's on our blood chemistry sheet, our step back form. And 24 to 44 is the lymphocyte number, but sometimes I just find it easier if I'm going to memorize things to have things in order. Like when we looked at the iron panels and it was um, 30 for SAT and 300 for TIBC, right? And I just can remember that. And if it was if it was like 297 and 32, I'd never remember, right? So, um, 40, 60, 20, 40 is something that I can, when I'm doing a cursory glance at a panel, is something I can remember. So that's a lot of times you'll find later on in this is the number that gets used. So these are just like the RBC is the total number of red blood cells, the WBC is the total number of white blood cells, and then these are the 5 different white blood cells that we look at on a complete blood count. Everybody with me so far? Let me make sure I have the chat up. So if you guys have questions, feel
Yes.
free to unmute. Um, and then when we get panels back, we usually look at the relative numbers, right? We're looking at a percentage, but there's also absolute numbers on these panels too, which are down here. An absolute value is how many white blood cells. These are absolute numbers, and when you add them up, they're going to add up to the total number of white blood cells. So on this panel that we just had here, let me go back one. On this panel that we did here, it's 2 plus 1.1 plus 0.4 plus 0.1, and that's going to equal our 3.6. The relative number is out of 100%, and it's a percentage of each type. So the amount is always going to add up to 100%. You divide the absolute into the white blood cells to get the percentage, right? So neutrophils, the absolute number is 2.0. The total number was 3.6. When you divide it, you get 5.55555 repeating, which averages out right here to 56. Everybody understand how they get those numbers? Okay. So you divide the absolute, that gives the value as to which cell. See what happens when you voice the slides and talk? Cell, C-E-L-L. The body is making the most. So you want to understand the distribution of these white blood cells. But you have to keep in mind when you're looking at a low white blood cell count, you can't view a distribution of 65% neutrophils and 24% lymphocytes the same way as if the white blood cell count was high, because they're still relative to the total. Okay, you might not fully understand that, but do you guys comprehend that difference? That there is a difference?
Yes, but
Yeah?
I'm definitely still a little bit
Okay, we're going to
lost.
work through it, but just
Okay.
keep in mind it's relative. Okay? So, you can't, if you have a small amount of white blood cells, that relative percentage is going to tell you something different than if you have an overabundance of white blood cells.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yes.
Okay? It's just like when we looked at RBCs, right? And we needed to know, are the numbers that we're looking at below this a dehydrated picture or a hydrated picture, right? So when you're looking at the white blood cells, are you looking at a lot of white blood cells or too few white blood cells, right? Because that person is going to be different. So, nope, look it. I didn't have to go backwards. I could have gone forward. So if the white blood cells are elevated, right, you're going to be looking probably at an acute infectious or inflammatory process, right? Just because the white blood cells are elevated, does it always mean that there's an infection? So it's infectious or inflammatory. And then when the white blood cells are depressed, it could be signifying a chronic infection or inflammatory process. So the neutrophils are the first line of defense, and they are the most abundant. They're phagocytic, meaning they can consume bacteria. Um, if they are elevated, there's probably a therefore, right? If they're the ones that come out and consume the bacteria, the little Pac-Mans, right? Um, you can probably assume that there's a bacterial infection going on. Again, you have to consider the white blood count, okay? And see what that level is when you're looking at this. So does everyone know what phagocytosis looks like? This is a little picture of phagocytosis. This is saying a food particle, but it could be a bacteria. It's the same process, right? So you've got the cell here, and it's going to extend. This is why I call it a Pac-Man, because it extends around the food particle and then creates a little vacuole, okay? Or the little microorganism, and it creates this little vacuole. Um, and then the lysosomes come in and release their enzymes into the vacuole, and then it does its little battle inside here. And now this is a picture, another picture of this. So the microparticle comes into the cell, right? It gets wrapped around. This is the lysosome with the enzymes coming in. Everything's getting digested, and then whatever is indigestible, it poops right out. So just like your little digestive tract, right? And the thing is very similar. If you look at the outside of this cell, the green part, this food or whatever never really enters into the cytoplasm of the cell. There's a boundary here that does not get broken. So as this goes through, it passes through the cell, but it never really becomes part of the cell. Do you see that? There's a really good
Yeah.
boundary mechanism there.
So it can't ever damage the interior of the cell
No, it keeps it
or the endotoxins or anything that it
right.
might produce. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So the enzymes and things are in the lysosome. They get put into this vacuole and then they do their job and then it gets released.
Jill, are you
Oh,
saying
Go ahead.
like a bacteria
Mm-hmm.
passes through the cell and doesn't become part of it?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So the bacteria comes in, and if this neutrophil is doing its job, it's going to destroy the bacteria and then release out all the little LPS and whatever out the other side.
and
Right?
out the other side is going to be extracellular fluid then, or the tissues?
Yeah, wherever it is. Yep.
Okay.
And then this is the job for something else. So the second line of defense that we have are lymphocytes. Um, lymphocytes you can associate with B cells, T cells, and natural killer cells. White blood cells that are elevated, along with an elevation in lymphocytes, you can suspect that it's going to be an acute process. But if the white blood cells are depressed, along with an elevated lymphocyte count, you can suspect a chronic infection. And then another pattern that you might want to keep in mind is that elevated lymphocytes in the presence of low WBCs could also correlate with autoimmune conditions. So low white blood cells, but elevated lymphocytes could be chronic, right? Because low white blood cells indicate something that's more chronic. So even if lymphocytes are up, it could be chronic. And then the opposite, elevated with an elevated lymphocyte, you can think that it might be something more acute.
So Joe, anytime you see low white blood cell count,
Yeah,
the total, you think that that's a good sign of chronic infection then?
that's something, yeah, it's long standing, something that could be going on for a while.
Versus a
Because,
nutrient
right.
deficiency.
Well, it might be. You
I
could
mean,
have both,
but
right? I
right,
mean,
but we,
and that's the thing. Like these are things that you're and I talk about this a little bit later. You're not going to be able to pinpoint. These are just things that are going to start crossing your mind, right? Because you're going to try to identify a pattern. And if somebody has a chronic infection, right? They've got something chronically inflamed, chronic infection, chronic something. A lot of times nutrient deficiencies go hand in hand with that, right?
true.
So, it's a chicken and the egg kind of situation,
Okay.
but it just goes to where are your detective skills going to lead you when you see these things? Because we're not trying to say, oh, you have a chronic infection, right? And we're not going to run tests and try and label the infection, but you want to kind of know what is the dynamic happening in this person's body? What are these numbers trying to tell me about who this person is and what kind of environment we're dealing with? So these are just some of the patterns that you can keep in mind. I wish I could edit while I was presenting. Go back and do that after the call. Um, so neutrophil and lymphocyte pattern. So there's a window of space between them that changes when they shift. Because remember, we're looking at relatives and the relatives are going to add up to 100%, right? So if lymphocytes go up, neutrophils are going to go down to equal the 100%. It's kind of like when we look at total protein, right? And you're looking at the numbers that add up to a certain number. So this is always going to equal 100%. So low neutrophils could indicate B12 or folic acid deficiency, right? So there's that nutrient deficiency. If neutrophils are low, because we need B12 or folic acid to make neutrophils also. And we know the association with these for RBCs, but they're also used in neutrophil production as well. So yes, nutrient deficiencies can cause shifts in white blood cell numbers. Any questions on that, guys? Are you tracking with me? So, here we have, 50 to 30. If we looked at the functional ranges and we were smack dab in the middle for neutrophils and smack dab in the middle for lymphocytes, this is what we would see is 50 neutrophils and 30 lymphs. So as neutrophils go up, lymphocytes are going to go down. And the same thing's going to happen. If neutrophils go down, lymphocytes are going to raise because this is optimal and these are going to shift up and down based on what's going on. So, when you're looking at, a high and a low or things that are more balanced, you have to keep in mind that these are just relative to the whole. They're always going to add up to 100. You're never going to get, this something, it's going to shift because it's just a percentage. So as the absolute numbers change, the percentages these are always going to add up to 100, right? Where these might be, this is a 3.6 panel, right? But what if this was a 7.8 panel, right? It's gonna give you a totally different picture of what's going on. But just remember that these numbers add up to 100. So when you see, things in these ranges, it's never going to add up to more than that because they're just a percentage of the total white blood cell count. That's the same slide. So the question is the body, right? Is the body making more lymphocytes or is it making less neutrophils? Because they have to add up to 100%, right? So if these numbers stay the same, you're going to have to shift things to equal 100. So the body could be making more lymphocytes due to an infection or maybe an autoimmune disease, but at the same time, it could also be making less neutrophils due to a nutrition deficiency. So it appears, the lymphocytes appear to be elevated, but you don't know. So how would you distinguish this possibility? If there's low B12 or folate, like what are some other markers that you guys could use in your investigation?
The is it MCV?
Mm-hmm.
Is
You
that
could
what it
look
is?
at MCV.
Um,
What else would you look at?
Metamelonic acid,
MMA, if you had
Mm.
that. Yep.
then proteins to see if there is low stomach acid, for example.
Possibly.
Mm.
But any of the red blood cell numbers, right? You could actually look at B12,
Mm.
right? If they have it, you can
Right.
look at
Yeah.
MCV, you can look at hemoglobin, hematocrit, B12, trying to figure out, what the nutrient is. Does my client have a nutrient deficiency and where is it? Just to add, right, to your picture of how are we going to break this down and investigate what's going on. We do this a lot with the red blood cells, right? Trying to figure out the nutrient deficiencies, but you also need to take that into account in your white blood cell pictures.
I mean, you could look, and see, the protein, the albumin, the globulin, are those low? Are
Right.
the B6 lows? Are the thyroid nutrients low? I mean, all that can, kind of give a hint that maybe that's what it is. It's just
Right.
the B12 is low when other nutrients are low also.
Yeah. And you're just looking to see who is this person? What's going on?
Right.
Right? I mean, you've got their symptoms, you've got what's happening. If they're supplementing or not supplementing and should be, right? Maybe they're a vegan client and they're not taking B12. So you really need to pay attention to who is this person. So monocytes, these are Clark Kent cells. Because they're found in the blood as monocytes, but the minute they're needed at the tissues, they become macrophages. So if there's infection or inflammation or something that needs to happen, they shift. So monocytes turn in the bloodstream and macrophages in the tissues. They become phagocytic. So the same, just like the neutrophils that gobble up the different things. Monocytes do the same job. Like to call them the janitors or the cleanup crew. It is a cleaning up process. So when monocytes go up, whenever they're elevated, because standard range, I believe, is 0 to 7% for monocytes. Correct me if I'm wrong. We'll look at it in the next slide. we know there's been some sort of inflammatory response, right? So even when monocytes are within that 0 to 7% range, but they're at 7 instead of 0, right? You know that they're out there, that something's going on, that they're out there cleaning up the job, right? And then when they go higher than that, there's more cleanup happening.
What's the time frame on that?
The monocytes,
Yeah, I mean, like how long after the infection, I mean, would you expect to see while they're cleaning up, would you expect to see an elevation?
um,
You know,
pretty quickly. I mean,
like days versus weeks?
yeah, and I mean, depending on how long, right? That's the acute versus the chronic, right? How fast is this person actually doing the cleanup job and getting to the other end of it? Um, and there's a lot of different variables with that. But this is a lovely picture of a bruise, right? And the monocytes are, that's what's happening. They're here. All the macrophages are on the outside of this bruise doing the cleanup. And that's where they're concentrated, right? They usually don't heal from the middle out. They usually heal from the outside in. And that's because that's happening. So just to give you a picture of,
But you would expect their monocyte count to be a little high.
they had a lot of bruising. Yeah. I mean, after a car accident or something, right? Or fall down the stairs, some sort of injury. Yeah. I mean, that's working, right? Um, but remember, we're not using a single test number to diagnose, right? So when these things raise, right, neutrophils go up or lymphocytes or whatever, we can't immediately say, oh, that number's high, you know, there's something. It's more, we're looking more at relatively what's happening in the body. And just because one is high or low doesn't necessarily lead you to a label. Not that we're doing that, but just a reminder. So eosinophils have some phagocytic ability. Their granules contain histamine, and if eosinophils, look at that, that voice texting. If eosinophils are high, they could be breaking down histamine. You guys can always tell when I'm short on time making slides, can't you? Elevations could also be related to parasites due to the fact that eosinophils, snails, oh my gosh. Sorry, guys. I will fix these before you can download them. So the fact that eosinophils exist in the gut and lungs predominantly, um, interesting fact, in Chinese medicine, the gut and the intestines and the lungs are like on the same, they're connected on the same meridian. And I think, this is probably part of the reason why. And basophils are highly granulated and also associated with asthma and allergies. I thought I caught all my typos. Um, so a lot of times you guys will see in eosinophils can go up and down seasonally. Like, so if someone has in basophils, if someone has seasonal allergies, you can see them going up or down. You can also see correlations between histamine and high histamine and B6 deficiency. So B6 deficiency, right, will cause DAO to break down, which will cause an increased amount of histamine, which is going to cause an increase in eosinophils. Which then, but then the opposite, right? So every time someone has high eosinophils doesn't mean they always have a B6 deficiency. This is where we can't jump to conclusions. We've got to go and try and figure out who is this person and what do we know about them. Are there patterns that you guys have noticed in your practice working with clients with white blood cells and and things. Eosinophils also could be related to parasites. Um, so, if that's, if there's no other reason for eosinophils to be high, you can also
We were just,
think that.
the student and I were looking at a patient that we had this week that I had not seen in a while. She's been doing pretty well. And I was just going over lab work from like when she came to me.
Hmm.
And it was in December. It was several years ago, but it was in December, which is not a big seasonal allergy time.
Right.
But her eosinophils were like, what was it, 6, 7? No, it was high. And so like that struck me. I was like, oh, hey, um, that's not a, so I did think parasites at that point.
Hmm. Yeah, if there's no other, if there isn't any other reason why, um, you know,
high eosinophils could also be linked to allergies, to
Mhm.
seasonal.
Yes.
Right. But what I was saying was this was taken in December in South Carolina, which there's not a whole lot of anything blooming in December in South Carolina. So like that just unless maybe a pet or something like that, I guess you could ask more along
Mhm.
those lines. But parasites.
Yeah. So, whenever you're looking at white blood cells, you want to be thinking of inflammation or infection. Um, Step away from the list like Weatherby and Walsh, because sometimes those can just lead you down rabbit holes because white blood cell um, is a picture of shifting things in the body. So you want to be able to really it tests your ability to break down a case, to look at the clues. We're not making hard determinations, right? Just because eosinophils are high doesn't mean every client with high eosinophils has a parasite, right? But you need to look at what's going on with that person, right? Suss out, could this be something else? Don't overreact when numbers shift, right? Because sometimes things happen very rapidly, right? In acute situations, and the body can mount an immune response. Things can happen and be gone before there's even symptomology to back it up. Um, but you can't really make any determinations, right, without looking at the client. And without the client, you have no clue what's going on. They're just numbers on a page. But I hope that was a little bit more insightful for you guys to just kind of have an idea. I know a lot of times we just take white blood cell counts at face value and don't do the deeper dive into nutrients and some of the other things that might be going on. But this really is one of those things where you can't jump to conclusions. You really have to look at the client um, and understand what is happening with them and figure it, and just use this as part of the puzzle. Um, this is one of the tools. I have found it in some cases to be insightful. So this helps you figure out whether there's a TH1 or a TH2 dominant situation. It's a tool that you can get for free from Cogents. But the only way to really figure that out is through symptoms. And sometimes there's a clear pattern, but other times you're just left scratching your head. So every once in a while, it really kind of leads me down the right path. Most of the time, it's just another inconclusive set of things because they have an equal amount of both. But if you're looking for, remember that the lymphocytes are more attached to B cells, T cells, um, and natural killer cell activation. This might, if you have a high level of lymphocytes, this might help you figure out if you're dealing with a T cell situation. Um, and Cogents also has this, you know, this lovely thing here talking about, um, TH1 and TH2 status, and they have a bunch of these different flow charts. So if you guys have not looked at Cogents, and you're dealing with someone that has some weird immune system, white blood cell stuff going on, Cogents Immunology has a lot of tools that might help you, or it might just lead you down a rabbit hole that.
I recently took a dive into Cogents. I've had it for almost a year, I think, and I just hadn't gone into it. And so
Yeah.
recently, this last couple weeks, I've been going through their modules.
Uh-huh.
I love them. And I've
Yeah.
seen this many times, this screen right here.
Yeah.
And it's just been so helpful.
And they have lots of classes just walking you through this. Like
Yeah,
this
and
isn't
it's
just a
free.
slide. It's, and Jen used them too. She did kind of go down this whole path with the TH1, TH2, and similar to how we had a lot of conversations about Cogents actually. And really awesome. If you guys love getting into the nitty-gritty of the biochemistry, they even have live calls on Tuesday nights. Have you hopped onto any of those, Julie?
I have not. No, I've done the live calls.
So they do have where you can just sit and talk and ask questions. So if you really had a question, Sam Yannick will literally answer your question. You can bring client cases in, you can, but they're very, very much, he's selling a supplement line,
Right.
right? So their solution is always,
Which I use their supplement line anyways, pure
oh, I do
encapsulation.
too.
I was like, so that doesn't bother me. And they haven't been
Yeah.
strong on it. Where
No.
so far, I've just began a couple of modules
Right.
in it.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying when you go to the calls, he's like, well, what have you done? And this and that. And, and then they'll suggest, maybe some Bicalin or maybe some of this or some Perilla and, TH1 support or whatever it is, and, but very much into leaning less towards functional wellness and foundational support and more towards that allopathic, figure out what's out of whack, give them something, here's the supplement to fix that. On a deeper level than a prescription, but still, I kind of stepped away from the calls for that reason. Because there's just a lot of functional doctors and things on there that are looking to label and treat, label and treat, label and treat, where we're there's a few of us, on there that are looking for more of just a basic understanding of the root cause of what's going on. But it's interesting. It's definitely, if immunology is something that you guys are into, they definitely have some really great stuff. Their leaky gut, some of their other tools, I think I've shared them before. I forget where I share them, if I share them on the kit calls or if I share them here or wherever, but they definitely have some great flow charts on things. And if you're prepping for level 3 at SAFM, they've got some great interconnectedness handouts too. But I just figured I would share this resource with you guys. And it is free if you're not on it. There's a code. It's like $3,000 for the course, but then you just renew it annually. I've had it for, I don't know, gosh, 5 years, 6 years now. Long time.
So Joe, if you have somebody that presents like they're in, histamine overload, are
Mhm.
you typically going to see their eosinophils elevated?
Quite possibly.
Okay,
Um,
but not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There's always there's always the exception to the rule, right?
Right,
There's
but
always that person, typically,
typically a histamine overload would be driving up the eosinophils.
yes.